1797 was a monumental year for the Royal Navy, one that was marked by Cape St. Vincent and mutiny, and one that was crowned by Admiral Duncan at Camperdown. The shadow of the Nore mutiny was long, and as well as falling over the mouth of the Thames, it touched the North Sea Fleet, then under the command of Vice Admiral Adam Duncan. Despite this unrest, Duncan, who was a physical giant of a man, was able to remove the very real danger of invasion that the new Dutch Batavian Republic posed. Unlike the glamorous Mediterranean Command, or indeed that of the Channel, the North Sea Fleet had always been seen and equipped as a poorer relation. Historically, it comprised a mismatch of vessels, many in poor condition. It was to this fleet that the Dundee-born Admiral Duncan was appointed in 1795. After a dedicated but unspectacular career, Duncan, at the age of 66, proved himself to be very much the right man at the right time at the right place. The North Sea Fleet operated out of Great Yarmouth and was primarily engaged with maintaining a watch on the North Dutch coast off the Texel. It was here in this natural harbour that the Dutch based a fleet of approximately 25 ships. Since his appointment to the North Sea Command, Duncan had spent 2 years watching the enemy, regularly sailing to and fro from Great Yarmouth and between Great Yarmouth and the Thames estuary. It was this link between the great anchorage at the Nore and his fleet at Great Yarmouth that resulted in the second fleet mutiny of the year spreading to his command. On the 30th of April 1797, the crew of Duncan's aged flagship Venerable refused to sail. To the no-nonsense admiral, this was an outrage, and initially he had to be physically restrained before, in a calmer mood, he eventually listened to his crew's grievances, but refused to negotiate. Instead, by force of personality alone, he restated their duty, and such was the respect he commanded that his men returned to work, writing to their commander to apologize for their previous conduct. Shortly afterwards, a similar situation occurred on board the Adamant, another ship of Duncan's fleet. Once again, the force of Duncan's personality ensured that the crew quickly returned to duty. However, Duncan was not able to be aboard every ship under his command, and mutinous rumblings continued within his fleet. On the 26th of May, as Duncan put to sea to return to the Dutch coast, 4 of his 13 ships refused to sail. And as the remaining 9 approached the enemy coast, 7 more joined the mutiny and returned to Yarmouth. This meant that Admiral Duncan was left with just his own flagship, the Venerable, and the Adamant, the 2 vessels that he had personally brought back into line. With only 2 ships loyal to him, Duncan continued to blockade the enemy, sending out false signals to a non-existent fleet over the horizon. The news of the great fleet mutinies had reached the enemy, and had they been able to make faster and better use of this information, a successful invasion could have been a distinct possibility. The Irish patriot, or rebel depending on your point of view, Wolfe Tone, who had been working alongside the Dutch and for the French, surmised that now was an ideal time to attempt an invasion of Ireland, and from there, England. However, by the time that these plans had been put into place, the fleet mutinies were over and the opportunity had been lost. Watching the Dutch coast, Duncan had witnessed these preparations as troops were loaded onto ships and was now on full alert. Once again, with his full complement of ships, fortune did not favour the Dutch, as not only had the mutinies ended, but the weather had also kept them bottled up with contrary winds. The ideal window for invasion had closed, and by the middle of August, the troops were disembarked. In early October 1797, the commander of the Dutch fleet based at the Texel, Jan Wilhelm de Winter, was ordered to set sail to engage the British. There has been much debate regarding this order, as without the troops embarked, it was obviously not an invasion attempt, and so it's uncertain what they were supposed to achieve. But the order had been given, and so on the 7th of October, Admiral de Winter and his fleet set sail to seek out the British. Due to the lack of investment in resources for the North Sea Fleet, Duncan was constantly battling in order to keep his somewhat aged and ragtag ships at sea, so that at the time that the Dutch finally set sail, most of his ships had retired to Great Yarmouth for repairs and supplies, leaving Captain Trollope commanding the Russell and 5 other vessels to watch the Dutch coast. Using his resources wisely, Captain Trollope sent the Speculator back to Great Yarmouth to alert Duncan that the Dutch were at sea, and positioned the small cutter Active to direct the fleet when it finally arrived. whilst his remaining ships shadowed the Dutch as they sailed in a southwesterly direction. On the morning of the 11th of October 1797, Admiral de Winter, who had sailed down the Dutch coast, now turned back and was returning towards the Texel. The tactic was to try to lead the British into the shallower waters off the Dutch coast, knowing that his ships, by design, were able to operate closer to the shore than the heavier British vessels. As Duncan arrived off the Texel, the hunt for the Dutch began. After meeting up with Captain Trollope, who had been shadowing the Dutch awaiting Duncan's arrival, the fleet separated into two groups, one under the command of Duncan and the other under the command of Vice Admiral Onslow. Admiral de Winter, with his ships in a line of battle formation, was slowly trying to lure the heavier British ships towards the coast. As the wind was blowing towards the land, de Winter's plan was to bring the British closer and closer until their room for manoeuvre was compromised, and with his shallower draft ships, the initiative would belong to the Dutch. Initially, it had been Duncan's intention to form a single line and then to break through the Dutch line, each ship crossing that of an enemy vessel for maximum raking fire. However, it became obvious that this manoeuvre would take too long, and so he flew the signal for the British ships to pass through the Dutch and to cut off the enemy's retreat to the shallower water. Duncan's northerly grouping of ships was slightly further away than Admiral Onslow's, and so the honour fell to Onslow to begin the engagement. Onslow's 8 ships engaged 5 of the enemy's rear, quickly overwhelming them. Such was the decisive nature of Onslow's battle that some of his ships were able to join with Duncan's northerly squadron and then re-engage the front of de Winter's line. Most notably, Captain Bligh, formerly of the Bounty, commanding the Director. Bligh played a significant part in the defeat of de Winter's flagship, Vryheid. This assistance by Onslow's division was by no means insignificant, as at one point Duncan's flagship, Venerable, was engaged by 3 Dutch ships at the same time, resulting in significant damage. It was aboard this ship that the legend of Jack Crawford was born. Whilst under heavy fire, Duncan's flag had been shot away from the mast. As this could have been interpreted as a sign of surrender, seaman Jack Crawford was launched into legend as he climbed the shattered mast to reattach the flag. It was here that the English language received another of the many naval phrases into its consciousness, as Crawford nailed his colours to the mast. The Battle of Camperdown lasted for 2.5 hours, and the outcome was a decisive victory for the British, capturing 7 ships of the line, 2 fourth-rates and 2 frigates. Admiral de Winter was taken prisoner, and on coming aboard Duncan's flagship, when he offered up his sword as a sign of surrender, Duncan famously replied, "I would rather take a brave man's hand than his sword." The Battle of Camperdown effectively ended any threat of invasion from the Dutch coast. Quite why the French Directory decided to throw away such a valuable asset is still uncertain. The question remains, why was de Winter ordered to sea at all? Named after the Dutch fishing village of Camperdown, the Battle of Camperdown is one of the great victories of the Royal Navy. Unfortunately, probably due to the lack of Nelson's involvement, it is overshadowed and does not receive the wider recognition and acclaim that it deserves.